SNP Debate with Iain Dale.
Well, hello and welcome to the LBC SNP Leadership Debate live from Glasgow. I'm Iain Dale. It's the first UK-wide debate on radio. And after 8 years in the job, SNP leader and First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, will leave office in just 7 days' time. And one of the three candidates here tonight will replace her. Over the next hour, you'll hear from the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, Kate Forbes. You'll hear from former Community Safety Minister Ash Regan and Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Welfare, Humza Yousaf. And you can watch us on Global Player. And the number to call if you'd like to put your questions to the candidates is 0345 6060 973. Now, before we start with a few questions from me, let's hear from the candidates who will now introduce themselves for a maximum of 1 minute. Humza Yousaf.
Good evening. I'm Humza Yousaf, and I want to be the next leader of the SNP and Scotland's next First Minister, because I believe I'm the candidate that can deliver Scotland's independence. And by goodness, don't we need it, given the harm that a Tory Westminster government is causing. We need the powers of independence to make sure that we don't just reduce poverty, but we eradicate it. With the powers of independence, we can create that well-being economy that serves the people, as opposed to the other way round. We need independence so that we can ensure that every child in Scotland has the best start in life, like my own girls. So I want to build the team. I want to harness all of the talent of the SNP to ensure that we deliver independence. I'm the only candidate that's committed to standing up to Westminster's power grab and to protecting our pro-independence majority in Parliament. As First Minister, I would serve and commit to advance the rights of all of the people in Scotland. So I hope SNP members out there will choose me to be their next leader and the next First Minister of Scotland.
1 minute and 1 second. Let's keep it up. Kate Forbes.
Thanks very much, Iain. Good evening. Tonight, I want to see if we can lift this campaign on to higher ground, because amidst the clash and the clamour of a leadership contest, there is so much more that unites us as a party and as a nation. The SNP has won successive elections because it won the trust of the Scottish people. And despite that track record, I believe that there is an appetite within the party and across the nation for change. And that is precisely why I'm standing. I'm standing because I have got the right approach to change, with an understanding of the need for change and the ability and the competence to deliver the solutions that we need, whether that's resolving the issue of child poverty and the fact that 1 in 4 children are in poverty in Scotland, or whether that's reforming the NHS. But I'm also somebody who can reach across the political divide. I can reach across to those who are still not persuaded to vote yes in another independence referendum and persuade them, and I can do that in a respectful fashion. So where I started, I finish. There's so much more that unites us. Let's get behind that vision for change.
Ash Regan.
It's often said that people don't like change, yet it's the only guarantee in life. And it's become clear that change is necessary, both for the SNP and also for Scotland. And change can bring discomfort and, at times, grief. The view that I'm choosing to take is what an opportunity we have as a party to both grow and evolve. And I am up for the task of recentering, refocusing, steadying the ship, calling in the top talent who crucially have integrity in equal measure, and steering us home, united, to independence. My track record shows that I have the capability and the readiness to drive the truth forward, whatever the conditions. I speak up for truth, for my principles, and for the founding values and tenets of our party: fairness, transparency, and democracy. And I'll steward the nation's resources for all the people who call Scotland their home, and I will govern under devolution whilst preparing for and delivering independence.
Well, that was great timing. Let's keep your answers relatively short, then we can get as many questions in as possible. Now, on Friday night, the associate editor of the Scottish Sun, Chris Musson, tweeted this. He said, the SNP has gone from an unstoppable force to a complete basket case in the space of a month. Kate Forbes, whose fault is that?
I don't think it's anybody's fault. I think we're in the leadership contest, and it's the first one, of course, in 20 years. So it stands to reason that at this moment in time, we should have a frank and open debate about what the future looks for the SNP. I said in my opening remarks that the SNP has always won elections on the basis of holding the trust of the Scottish people. And right now, we are at a crossroads, and how we deliver for those in the cost of living crisis, how we reform the NHS, how we support economic growth. All of that is being discussed and debated. So I have stood on a platform for change from the beginning, long before the turmoil of the last few days.
I think what Chris was referring to was the internal struggles over the past few days. It hasn't shown the SNP in the best light, has it?
No, and it's two sides of the same coin. So how you manage the party internally is one side of the coin, and how you restore trust and transparency with the public is the other side of the coin. So you do have to get your own house in order to maintain the trust of the Scottish people. But that's why I keep talking about change, and I've said from the beginning that continuity won't cut it, because the status quo is great if we reflect on our track record, but we need to build on it and improve.
But that's difficult, isn't it? Because I understand in elections you're either sort of stick with nurse for fear of worse, or you are the change candidate. You're portraying yourself as a change candidate. Humza is portraying himself as a continuity candidate, and yet surely you're having to diss your own party's record in government, of which you have been a leading part.
Not at all. What I am clear about is that we need candour and honesty when it comes to the challenges that we face. We have an incredible track record. There's only one reason we've been winning elections, and that is our track record. But to build on that, if you want to take Scotland into the next decade, you can't just say that because the NHS has been better than the rest of the UK, for example, which it has been for the last few years, it will continue to do that unless we're serious about reform. So these are examples where you can build on a track record of which you're proud, but also say, what does the future look like?
Hang on. If the Scottish NHS has been better than the rest of the UK, which we might come on to in a minute, why did you say that you wouldn't appoint Humza as Health Secretary?
Well, what I was saying is that we need to build on our track record. All three candidates here...
But according to you, his track record is really bad.
Well, all three candidates here are putting themselves forward for the position of First Minister. All of us are arguing that we have the competence and the ability to deliver that change. In fact, none of us here are saying that no change is required. All of us are saying that change is required. The question for voters is, who do they trust to deliver that change?
Ash Regan, you've been very critical of the internal workings of the SNP over the last few days, particularly the way this election is being run. Your fellow candidates here said they have full confidence in the integrity of the election. Do you?
Well, I feel like the events over the weekend have somewhat borne out some of the points that I've been making over the last couple of weeks. I am the only candidate that started off saying, that I wanted a fresh direction because I thought we had issues in the party, and some of my fellow candidates here ridiculed me and said that I was ridiculous, that there was no need to change, everything was fine. And I think we can see through the events over the weekend with 3 very high-profile resignations in the party that things are not fine, that we do need to go in a different direction. We can't go on the way that we've been going. But
they're not listening to you, are they?
Well, I think lots of people are listening to me. I think
but the party isn't.
No, I think many people in the party are listening exactly to what I'm saying. And many of them are, I think there is a significant amount of voter regret out there at the moment. This contest has obviously been run in what I consider to be an inappropriately short time frame, and I did set that out right at the start because I felt that for something that's so significant as not just choosing a party leader, but choosing, the next First Minister of Scotland, that we needed a bit more time to set out our stall to members, to develop our ideas and talk about our policy platforms. Now what's happened is that over the last week, the material circumstances of this party have changed beyond all recognition. And I think some members may be thinking about how they cast their vote, and they may be thinking things are not quite as they thought they were.
Well, in the last couple of hours, the SNP have announced they're not going to rerun the election or allow people to edit their votes. Yeah. Are you still going to keep on with that campaign? Are you looking to the courts maybe to intervene?
No, I have taken in legal advice, but I have no plans to take any court action. What I put forward was what I thought was a very sensible, credible, compromise position, if you like, because I think there are people out there that maybe cast their vote. In these contests, we often expect that people will cast their vote quite early.
Will you trust the outcome?
So
we don't want to get into a Donald Trump situation here, do we?
A week ago. No, I've said that I will absolutely support whoever becomes the leader. But I do think there's no downside to increased transparency. I think everyone would agree that. And we need the members of the SNP, the wider public, everyone that's involved, all the candidates, to have, complete confidence in this process. It needs to be above board, assurances need to be given and so on, so that we all feel confident about the result.
Humza, Paul Mason, the Labour supporting commentator, he said the SNP has lost its leader, comms chief executive, misled the press over membership figures, and still faces a fraud probe. Anyone running as the continuity candidate had better do some fast footwork. He's referring to you.
Yes, indeed. First of all, let me say that I'm not the self-styled continuity candidate. People have, of course, said that about me. I've said I'll be not just my own man, I'll do things my own way and differently, to a large extent, to Nicola Sturgeon. But it would be foolish for anybody to look at our track record in government, look at our track record as a political party and not see that we have been extraordinarily successful, winning election after election after election. Support for independence at dizzying heights, never seen before, certainly not when I joined the party 16, 17, almost actually 20 years ago. So we have a recipe for success. We absolutely need to refresh, reform and re-energise. That's going to happen regardless actually of who I think, of who becomes the next leader of the SNP. And yes, the last 72 hours in particular have been incredibly difficult for the party. Let's not sugarcoat it. But notwithstanding that, we are still by quite some considerable distance the largest party in Scotland. And by the way, the most popular, and that's pretty good for a party that's been in government for almost 16 years.
How will you differentiate yourself from Nicola Sturgeon?
I think a few different ways. So first of all, I've brought forward and suggested some policies that if I am First Minister that are different. So for example, bring forward a £25 million fund where we can buy empty properties and put them into the social rented sector. That's just one example. The other things I've suggested is I'll take a different leadership approach. It's been well commented that Nicola, and I admire her and respect her a lot, had quite a kind of inner circle approach to leadership, and it served her well, served the party well.
What do you mean by that?
Well, inner circle. She had a number of people that she would often speak to, refer to, that would advise. And that's been well commented. It's no kind of secret. I think people have talked about that for many, many years. My approach to leadership would be one of a big tent. We've got a huge amount of talent. Westminster, we've got Stephen Flynn, Mary Black, great MPs. In the Scottish Parliament, huge amounts of talent. Local government, in this city alone, for example, we are leading the administration. Huge amounts of talent in local government. Harness all of that talent and build the team necessary to deliver independence.
Ash Regan, you've only served as a junior minister over a 4-year period. Nicola Sturgeon clearly never rated you good enough to join her cabinet, and yet you now think that you're qualified to lead the country. What gives you that self-confidence?
Well, I have been in government for many years. I've obviously been able to see, I would say, some of the ways that we could have been building more on the success that we had in government, and possibly have pointed out even some mistakes that we've made along the way. So I feel I'm qualified to take that forward. And also, it isn't really based on, the former leader's assessment of any one person's potential. It's about values. It's about whether you can carry the country. It's about whether you think that you have what it takes in order to make the big decisions, have the right political instincts, and communicate that message out to the wider public. And I believe I do have all of those things.
Kate Forbes, I'm a gay man. I have a husband. According to your church, that makes me a sinner. Now, you've said that you adhere to the teachings of your church. Am I a sinner?
On the contrary, I strongly believe that as First Minister, I would continue what I've been doing as Finance Secretary, which is to govern for all of Scotland, because I believe every single individual is equal. And that is obviously the thread that runs through my politics. It's the thread that runs through how I treat people. And I would defend to the hilt your rights in the hope that you would also defend other minorities' rights, including people of faith. And I think that's how we are able to exist together.
Which I do, but you haven't answered the question. Do you personally consider that I'm a sinner?
Well, I consider you as much of a sinner as I consider myself to be a sinner. We are both equal, completely equal in both the eyes of the law, but also in my eyes, and more importantly in the eyes of my faith. And as a person who believes in the inherent dignity of every human being, I actually am taught to believe that you are of greater value than I am, and I am to serve you and every other citizen in Scotland in that fashion. So when it comes to legal rights, I will defend absolutely your right to live and to love without harassment and fear, in the same way I would defend the rights of any other minority group to live and to love without harassment and fear. And that applies to all protected characteristics.
Okay. Humza, just on the health service, you said that I think it was actually Kate said that the Scottish Health Service is doing better than the rest of the UK, but there are plenty of issues where it's not, and only 22% of Scots think the NHS is improving here. Life expectancy in Scotland has dropped by 4.4 years since 2013 in Scotland, and only by 6 months in England. Why is that?
Well, two things. First and foremost, nobody is ever going to say, let alone me, that there aren't challenges in the health service up here in Scotland. Of course there are. We've just suffered the effects of a global pandemic. But you've seen even just today, minutes before we came on air, that the RCN, the Royal College of Nursing, and the Royal College of Midwives have both agreed to our pay offer for 23-24. So that's 2 years of pay offers that trade unions have now agreed, which means that there's no more strikes in Scotland. In terms of the challenges, Scotland faces many challenges around public health. Our relationship with alcohol, our far too high numbers of drugs deaths. And that's why if I'm First Minister, I want to make sure that we are focused on those issues that are clearly affecting people day in and day out in their everyday lives. We have made progress, for example, in relation to smoking cessation. We have made progress in relation to those that are being detected early for lung cancer, which affects people in more deprived areas in Scotland than anywhere else. So there's progress, plenty of areas
but
that can point to progress.
Not on drug deaths, though.
And
that has been a running sore in Scotland for years.
Agreed.
You have
You're going to get
three
no
times more drug deaths in Scotland.
You're going to get
England.
no argument from Iain that, and I don't think from any of the candidates here, that in drugs death we have simply failed too many people. And what I would intend to do is a number of things. First of all, continue to pressure the UK government to get that licence for safe consumption rooms, where we've got heroin assistant treatment, like in Glasgow. Can we extend that beyond the city? More carriage of naloxone. But let's continue to make sure that fighting drugs death is a national mission, and I would appoint a Minister for Drugs Policy and make sure they were directly accountable to.
Because Nicola Sturgeon said she took her eye off the ball. Do you, each of you, do you think the SNP government owes the Scottish people an apology for this policy, which clearly isn't working? And this year, and there was a slight fall last year, only 9, but a slight fall. The last year, they've gone up again. It's still failing. Would you like to apologise for that?
Well, I think that we owe the Scottish people an apology when we aren't able to get the outcomes that we want. And one death is one death too many when it comes to drug deaths. So absolutely, our job in government is to serve, to deliver, and to ensure that we protect the Scottish people as our first priority. And when we haven't been able to do that as effectively as we would have liked, I think it's quite clear that there is deep regret. But it's not just enough to have regret.
Okay.
You absolutely
Briefly,
need to deliver better policies and outcomes.
So obviously we have appointed a drugs minister in the last few years, and I think that was the right approach. And I know that some good work is ongoing there. But I think we do have to admit that possibly we are not, we haven't been doing things in the way that we should have been doing them. And there is obviously much more that we can do. I think we need to put more emphasis onto the mutual aid model. And I also think that we have to have an absolute unwavering commitment that we believe as a country that recovery is possible. And I'm not sure we're quite there yet, but I think we can get there.
Very briefly, Humza.
Two things. One, absolutely give an apology to those families that have lost a loved one through substance misuse and drug misuse. And what I would say to them also is a reassurance that I, certainly if I'm the First Minister of Scotland, I want to look at the most radical and bold approaches, because what we've been doing thus far clearly hasn't had the effect we'd want it to have. So I'm all for pushing the boundaries to make sure that we can be as radical and bold in this area as possible.
Right, let's go to callers. Barry is in Dumfries. Hello, Barry.
Good evening. Candidates, just to ask you, our party has hemorrhaged 30,000 members over the past few months. What are you going to do to increase our membership and to bring unity back to our party?
Humza.
So a few things. First of all, the new leader, one of the first things they have to do internally is get in amongst the weeds and understand why we lost those members. So is it because, for example, people don't view we've made enough progress on independence and been talking too much about process and not enough about policy? And that actually is the answer to the second question. How do you make sure you grow support? Because I want to grow support for independence, and I'm pleased that in the latest poll that came out last week that I was the most favoured candidate amongst SNP supporters and members. So how do we grow that support? I think we've got to grow that support by inspiring people. You don't inspire people by talking about Section 30s and de facto referendums, as important as process is. You inspire people with a vision to eradicate poverty, inspire people with a vision to bring forward a wellbeing economy. You inspire people by talking about giving every single child in Scotland the same start in life.
Does that really work, though, Kate? Because obviously if you're a member of the SNP, I would have thought, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but I would have thought your number one priority is to get independence, not to necessarily concentrate on all the things that Humza's been talking about, important though they are.
That's how you get independence. You build that consistent majority.
And on the flip side, I would say that independence is a means to an end, and it's an end to poverty. But there's two things I would say. One is that we need to get back to our priorities that actually unite the party. And as you said, at the end of the day, it is independence that is the goal of most SNP members. And so focusing on a path to independence really matters, and looking at the issues that unite us more than the issues that divide us. But I think the second thing, the means to do that, is actually empowering our party members. So I've been at pains to say that we need to empower our members to be able to shape policy. They need to know that the decisions that are being taken by government are not just as determined by the leader, but actually are based on the platform that the party has agreed to as influenced and formed.
So well for Labour under Jeremy Corbyn, didn't it?
Well, when it comes to the SNP, we've got, you talked about 72,000 members. If you think of that membership, talents, background, expertise, and we have always been a democratic institution, and I think we need to re-empower our members to actually inform the policies.
Ash.
Yeah, so I've been obviously talking about this over the last few weeks, and I was the first to say, as part of this hustings, that I suspected that we had lost a large number of members over the last wee while. And obviously this is anecdotal. I don't have the data on this. I imagine the party perhaps does keep data on the reasons that people give when they relinquish their membership. But my assessment of it was down to a lack of perceived progress on the independence question, and also the gender recognition reform. Now, the statistics do seem to bear that out. If you think we've lost about 31,000 around about the time of the stage one for the GRR last year, which has up until now. So that's a large number of members. Now, we still have a lot of members. You know, we're still a very successful party. We have a large number of members. However, when large numbers like that leave, I think the sensible thing to do is to look into that and say, why are we losing members, and what can we or should we be doing about it? I'm the only candidate here that set out an SNP action plan when I first announced my candidacy several weeks ago. The idea behind that being that we need to make members feel valued, we need to reflect the interests that they have, we need to modernise the party and bring back the democracy that I think is missing. Some of the people that have written to me over the last few months have said to me that if I become the leader, they will rejoin the party. And some of them are saying that they consider me to be the only hope for the party at this juncture.
Right, Barry, thank you very much for that. Let's go to our next caller. It's Kirsty in Gurrock. Hello, Kirsty.
Hello, hi, how are you?
I bet I haven't, have I? Hi, Kirsty. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. What it is I want to ask, why is it that Scotland, who's a net exporter of electricity and gas and things like that, why do we pay more? And why? What are you going to do about it? And what are you going to do to fight Westminster about getting more power and not them taking more away?
Kate Forbes.
So I think there's a few things there. First of all, Scotland has very high levels of fuel poverty, despite the fact that we are producing huge amounts of energy. And the bottom line for me is the fact that the energy market and energy policy is largely entirely determined on a reserve basis by the UK government, and hasn't been reformed for years, for decades. And that reform is absolutely vital. And when that reform comes, it needs to be reformed by those who actually experience the impact. You see that particularly in the Highlands in terms of the costs per unit of electricity, despite the fact that a lot of the renewables in particular are coming from there. So it needs reform. And for as long as that reform is delayed, then we are going to see families in fuel poverty despite the abundance of fuel on our doorstep.
Ash has said that she would want to, correct me if I'm wrong, Ash, but you've said you want to exploit oil and gas resources perhaps more than is being done at the moment. Would you go along with that, Kate?
I think that the just transition needs to be just. So what I've said is that we do want to transition away from oil and gas. That is the aim. But it needs to be done at a pace that doesn't undermine or hamstring the resource that we have in that industry. So we need the same people to be working in renewables as currently working in oil and gas.
Yes, that's also what I was saying. There's no point, and I think the public would agree with me on this, there's no point continuing to import oil and gas to use it and not be extracting it from Scotland, because we need to protect our own workforce. And so the timetabling is very important. And I am committed to this, if we transition over to renewables, we have to make sure that we have the jobs ready for people to move into. We can't have a situation where, we stopped extracting oil and gas, but we're still importing it, and the people in that industry have got nowhere to go. Because the people in that industry are the backbone, in many cases, of many communities right around Scotland, and we can't afford to have those hollowed out in that way.
Humza?
So let me answer Kirsty's question first and foremost. She's absolutely right. We should be fighting Westminster on this because, of course, the energy market regulation, of course, is reserved to the UK government. And it's a travesty that the wholesale gas prices have fallen as dramatically as they have, but yet energy bills are still sky high for people. And the Chancellor, of course, missed an opportunity to make that right in the spring statement recently. And Scotland, of course, an energy-rich country that's fuel poor because of those decisions. For me, I also believe that where we have the power for renewables, for example, in order to, for example, ScotWind, instead of just leasing those renewables, offshore renewable projects, we should actually take a public equity stake so that if there's profits made off those renewables, they come back into communities and reinvested back into the communities and not just profits that go to the shareholders. In terms of your point about oil and gas, I'm a firm believer in the just transition, but we're not going to do what Thatcher did to our mining communities. We're not going to destroy communities. We're going to take workers with us on this journey. So important that we frame any decision around oil and gas in relation to energy security, which is not just a domestic matter. We've seen from the war against Ukraine that actually energy security, of course, is an international and global matter.
Thank you very much, Kirsty, for your question. Let's go to the Shetland Islands and talk to Kerry. Hello, Kerry.
Hello, good evening to everybody. I'm Kerry from the Shetland Islands, and I'm founder of Shetland Pride. I got a question for
Congratulations.
Ash, really.
What would you like to ask?
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask all of them, all the candidates, especially Ash, because last year, Ash, you resigned as Minister for Community Safety, stating you had considered the issue of gender recognition reform bill and then concluded your conscience would not allow you to vote with the government. Can you tell me exactly, and this is for all candidates, how many transgender people you personally met to find out why and if the bill was vitally important to them and their mental health, or were you swayed by the critics who argue that such a law, without any real evidence, could have an impact on women's spaces when, as a matter of necessity and convention, especially me as a trans person, transgender people have, in actual fact, been utilising gender-opposite spaces without problems or issues for years?
Ash.
Yes, I did. I spoke to a number of trans people, obviously, as you would expect, when I was doing the research in order to take part in the later stages of the bill. And what came across to me quite strongly, in fact, was that, the trans community are not homogenous and that many of them had different views on this topic about how they thought that we should proceed. So I couldn't vote for the bill because, as far as I was concerned, I could see that there was a conflict of rights inherent in it, and that I felt that it did have an impact on UK reserved equality law, and that it would make it very difficult to uphold the exemptions for single-sex spaces. So I thought about this very carefully. I looked into it, researched it, spoke to a number of different people, and I made this, tried to introduce amendments which I felt would enhance safeguarding. What I'm saying as a candidate in the leadership race, though, is that I will not be challenging that bill, because obviously it's now stopped by Westminster, because I believe we will lose that court case. And I feel like if you're going to challenge it, it's almost like you're asking for a blank check.
So basically it would be finished under your leadership.
Money. No. I don't think we should be spending taxpayers' money on something that the public, don't support. However, what I've said is that this is the ideal type of issue to go to a citizens' assembly. So that way the public can have a look at this issue, and if there's a desire for that they can find a way forward.
Isn't that a complete cop-out? Because surely the Scottish Parliament is the ultimate citizens' assembly. That's what you're elected to decide on.
Yes, but...
And you did provide leadership on that. Whatever anyone else says, you resigned, you fell on your sword, which must have been a painful thing to do. Yeah,
it was certainly not an easy thing to do, I'll say that much, but I felt it was important to do that at the time, and I think it shows that I'm prepared to stand up for my principles, to do what I think is right. Not everyone would agree with me, obviously, to do what I think is right, even something that will disadvantage me. And I felt very strongly that this did impact on the rights of women and girls and their safety and their dignity.
Kate Forbes, why didn't you do the same as Ash did and resign? Because you've made clear that you are also against it. You wouldn't have voted for it. You were on maternity leave at the time. But you could have resigned your post then as well, but didn't.
Well, my baby was 2 months old when the first vote happened, then 4 months on the second vote. And as you will know, that on any matter like this, it's important, I think, that mothers are either on maternity leave or they're not on maternity leave. And it's been a bit of a rush back from maternity leave unexpectedly. My position on this is that you have to speak to people with lived experience before you make any decision.
So how many did you speak to? How many trans people did you speak to?
There was quite a few I spoke to. In terms of, I'm not going to count because I think that's quite inhumane in terms of counting the number of people. But I spoke to a number of people who can confirm that I had meetings with them. I also spoke to women and girls. I spoke to a lot of people in my constituency, and I'm ultimately there as a representative to represent my constituents. And my position on this is very clear, that I think the Gender Recognition Act does need to be reformed. So it does need to be reformed in a way that destigmatises the trans community and ensures that there isn't an onerous burden.
How does it stigmatise them in the first place?
Because it is extremely onerous. It is extremely challenging to go through with the process. Many of them will say it's extremely undignified going through the process in terms of the evidence that you have to provide. So I think it does need to be reformed in a way that is a lot more dignifying, and I've always supported that. But I think it needs to be reformed in a way that also ensures the confidence of women and girls. And I think a lot of the debate is perhaps bigger than the actual core substance of the bill, but that's even more important to provide.
Under your leadership, it would be paused as well.
No. So that's not what I've suggested. I've said that if we were an independent country, we'd have to sort this out ourselves anyway. So rather than go to court as the first port of call, I think court should always be your last port of call once you've seen the legal advice. I'm not spoiling for a fight just for the sake of it. I actually want us to get to a position where we have a bill that works, that reforms the Gender Recognition Act and also provides that confidence.
Humza.
I find it just a bizarre explanation, actually, that we should amend a bill that was passed by the majority of Holyrood. Had members of every single political party, including the Conservatives, actually, some members of the Conservatives backing the bill. So every political party had supporters of the bill. And to amend it, because the Westminster government have chosen to veto a piece of legislation for the first time using Section 35, I don't understand why any
which they
SNP,
have the power to do.
Which they have the power to do, but any SNP leader would look to simply dance to Westminster's tune and amend the legislation. I have to say, look, I have obviously spoken to a number of trans people and also those that have disagreements with the bill and GRR bill, but I fully support it. Why? Because I've said often, I'm a minority. I live in this country as a minority. My rights don't exist in some kind of vacuum. They're completely interdependent on your rights. And all we're trying to do with the GRR bill is make life that little bit easier for probably one of the most marginalised, stigmatised groups in the entire country. And this is where I take some level of exception to what Ash says around throwing this issue into a citizens' assembly. That I, as a Muslim, my rights have been under attack for many years, and particularly hard after post 9/11. I can't imagine somebody saying, you know what, forget what you guys think. Let's just throw this out to the public in a citizens' assembly, and everybody else in the public can determine what your rights should be. No, we should be showing leadership, and leadership when it comes to the rights of the most marginalised community is that we should not just be protecting them, but where possible, advancing them. And I will absolutely, my first principle is to absolutely fight that Westminster veto, because I don't think that the UK government should have the right to strike down our laws.
But they do. How do you fight it? Because they constitutionally they do have the right.
First you fight it. What legal advice have you seen? Advice have you seen?
I'm almost 100% certain that we will lose that.
What legal advice have you seen?
And I also think
you're 100% based on legal advice that you've seen.
Does the Parliament not work for the public? We know that the
Parliament passed the bill by a majority, Ash.
But the public don't support this bill.
When it comes to the advancing of rights, and my goodness, this just demonstrates, I think, that, this is why, as a minority, I can speak about this. Because, if you expect that in every single case where you're going to advance the rights of minorities, that it should be down to a public vote only.
No,
sometimes in leadership, if you just let me finish, sometimes in leadership, in a position of leadership, you have to demonstrate that leadership, particularly when it's for the most marginalised communities. And you've got to take people on the journey with us, for sure, but you can't just not back the rights of a minority because the majority of the public might not back it. That's not leadership, that's a cop-out.
OK, we will take more of your calls in a moment, and also we'll have our Ask Me Anything round where the candidates will grill each other. Don't go anywhere, because the news bulletin is going to last just 40 seconds.
SNP leadership candidate Humza Yousaf has told LBC the party's new leader needs to understand why they've reportedly lost 30,000 members. The party initially tried to deny the claim, leading to a wave of resignations. Ash Regan says she believes the numbers are down to a lack of perceived progress on independence, which Kate Forbes says is the key goal of most members. A report by the UN has warned there is a rapidly closing window of opportunity to cut carbon emissions. Scientists from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has called for richer countries to bring forward their net zero targets. And members of the RMT union at Network Rail have voted to accept a new pay deal, drawing their dispute to an end. LBC weather, rain moving eastwards across the UK tonight, a low of 5 degrees.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. The SNP debate with Iain Dale.
Right, this is our Ask Me Anything round, where one of the candidates will be grilled by the two others. They each have 2 minutes to put their question, or maybe questions, to Humza Yousaf. Ash, would you like to start?
Yes. Given obviously the resignations that the party has had over last weekend, I'm wondering if you see that as a material change in circumstances.
No, I don't see it as a material change of circumstances. Obviously, it's frustrating that the last 72 hours have not been the party's finest hour, but I actually agree with you. I saw your statement today that you have faith in the integrity of the ballot and that you'd respect the outcome, so I'm absolutely agreed with you on that.
So you don't think that someone presenting themselves as a continuity candidate and at the beginning saying, that all is well in the party, everything's fine, you don't think that that's been undermined and that has moved on significantly in the last week? Well,
I haven't described myself as a continuity candidate. You have, and that's fair enough for you.
To be fair, most of the media has too.
And that's fair enough. But what I would say is that I want to build on the excellent track record of our party that has won us election success.
I think we all do.
After election success. So if that is continuity, then that is no bad thing. But in terms of the party, I've said from day one that internal party HQ reform is needed. There's a great opportunity actually for the party, although as difficult as the last 72 hours have been, that we have a new leader in place and a new chief executive. And I think that's going to be a great opportunity for the party to refresh.
So for members who might feel that a lot of the things that they thought were the case are now not the case, that have felt quite surprised or shocked even by the events of the last week, and would like to see, increased transparency in the process or vote editing as a compromise, what would you say to them?
I don't know a single election where there's been vote editing unless a candidate has dropped out. Now, I don't see any candidate to my left or to my right that's going to be dropping out of the race. If you think there's an election that you can point to where vote editing, as you describe it,
the Tory leadership election, but that ended. That ended really well.
and also, actually, I think the reason why they didn't do it was because they got advice. They got the advice from the Cyber Security Centre that it could be open to hacking, and that's why Mike Russell, the interim chief executive of the party, has said that it wouldn't be the right idea. I have to say I agree with him, but I also agree with you. The integrity of the ballot, I have faith in, and I have faith in the outcome of the result too.
Kate Forbes, your question for Humza?
Do you agree that we can't forget about rural communities, particularly coastal communities, for example, when it comes to farming and fishing, when we're considering our net zero ambitions?
I do agree with that. So when it comes to our net zero ambitions, I do think we need to take people on the journey with us. At the same time, of course, I believe we've got to inject pace into that.
So the Scottish Fishing Federation's Chief Executive Elspeth MacDonald has said today that the Scottish Government's blue economy plans have been hijacked by the Greens and will push the fishing industry into the red. How would you respond to that?
Well, I just don't agree. I mean, I believe our partnership with the Greens has been exceptionally strong. I'm the candidate, of course, in this contest who said that he would continue that partnership with the Greens. It was a partnership, of course, that was voted by 95% of our membership. But when it comes to concerns that fishermen, fisherwomen, those involved in fishing industries right across our coastal communities have, I'm prepared to listen, prepared to see where we're able to make compromises where necessary. But ultimately, of course, what we are talking about is the future of our planet and the future for our children of this planet. So I'm wholly committed to that, those net zero ambitions.
We're grappling with a depopulation crisis in many of our rural communities, and the fishing community and the small farmers farming community are often the backbone of that community. You destroy them, you surely speed up depopulation.
Agreed, but nobody's talking about destroying them, and I don't agree with the characterisation that has been described. What I would say is that I've got plans, for example, to help with housing. Housing is one of the issues, and you'll know about this, I'm sure well, given the constituency you represent, of course, that housing is often the issue that means that speeds up depopulation. What I've said is I'd like to buy back empty properties, put them into social housing, which will help with some of that depopulation issue. But I don't want to, risk our net zero ambitions, which has seen us as a global leader on climate change.
Okay, Kate, it's your turn to be under the spotlight. Humza, have you got a question for Kate?
Kate, when it comes to progressive taxation, we both said at the trade union hustings that we agreed with progressive taxation. You then went on to Laura Kuenssberg on the BBC yesterday to say that you would rule out any tax rises at all in the future. Why would you rule out any tax rises for people that earn a six-figure salary like you and I?
Well, so obviously tax has been raised under the SNP, and I support that progressive increase in taxation. As you will know, we have very limited tools when it comes to tax, so we can only set rates and bands, and I really care about ensuring that we have the public revenue to reinvest in our public services. We know that we need to expand the tax base, and the point I was making to Laura Kuenssberg is that it's well accepted if the divergence with the rest of the UK is too profound, you then jeopardise that revenue that's coming in. So I think you can support progressive taxation, make the case for more tax powers, and also recognise that unfortunately with devolution you want to make sure that you're using the tax powers well to increase the tax base and actually maximise your revenue.
So can I just double check, absolutely clear for the record then, you would absolutely rule out, if you were the First Minister of Scotland for the next parliamentary term, you would rule out people who earn a six-figure salary like you, like myself, that you would rule out that they should pay any more tax than they currently are due to do for 2024.
I would rule out any greater divergence with the rest of the UK. Now, we don't know what...
So if let's just say the UK stays the same, you are ruling out that people on a six-figure salary like you, like myself, like government ministers, should pay more in tax.
You're obviously asking that question in the context of us having just increased quite significantly, not just the rate. Well, it's not just the rate, because remember, the highest rate kicks in at a much lower
To be honest, I'm just looking
threshold.
for a yes or no.
I know, but it kicks in at a lower threshold. So I think you need to understand the fact that tax rates and thresholds have been increased this year. And my position is we need to let that embed and maximise the revenue for our public services.
Okay, Ash.
Kate, what for you would be the biggest and most important priority in the short term for the Scottish Government if you became the leader?
Well, I think we first of all need to ensure that we reform the NHS to reduce waiting times, to reduce delayed discharge, and to ensure that people aren't having to pay for healthcare. Because if you believe in healthcare being free at the point of need and of use, then it stands to reason that we should be outraged at the fact that some people are paying for it because waiting times are too long. So that, for me, is one of the top priorities.
Okay. And in terms of ScotWind and the licensing and the way that was done, are you happy with the way that was carried out, or would you do things differently?
I would do things differently. I think a lot of lessons were learned. I came in at the tail end of it. One of the advantages of the way that we did it was that we had a big focus on the supply chain. And I think the problem with oil and gas is that money has been raised through taxation, for example, that doesn't come back to Scotland. We don't see the evidence of it. And we don't see the creation of jobs at the scale that we would want to. So with ScotWind, we absolutely need to make sure that we are boosting the economy, not just raising the taxation, which matters, and ensuring that there are jobs there for many, many decades to come.
Thank you very much, Ash. I have to say, you've been a lot more collegiate than you have been in some of the other debates so far. Is this my influence or what? Because Rebecca has sent an email on this. She says, as an SNP member, I'm angered by the ongoing divisive attacks during debates. These don't cover any of you in glory. My question to you all are these. How do you expect to bring our party back together if you become leader and First Minister? Couldn't you have learned how not to run campaigns from the Tory candidates? Well, it seems from the evidence of the last few minutes that you all have learnt that lesson. Have you actually all come together and decided to be a bit nicer to each other?
Not at all, but this is the 15th hustings, and we've been a lot nicer and more than we've been robust, I think.
Do you regret your offhand remark to Humza about, well, I might have you in my cabinet, but possibly not as health secretary?
It was meant to be tongue-in-cheek, but it obviously didn't come across that way, for which I can only say to Humza, he knows how much I respect him and value him as a colleague. We have toured the country together. We have spent more time together than many of us have spent with our families, and I think we've all got to know one another a lot more.
OK, right, let's go to some more calls. Donald is in Edinburgh. Hello, Donald.
Hi, Ian, how are you doing?
Hi, very well. What would you like to ask?
So I'm basically a floating voter, but in the past I feel it's been sort of quite unforgivable the way that the previous leader used the Scottish Government as the battleground on which to further the cause of independence. So my question is, will the candidates be willing to work productively with other party leaders or Sir Keir Starmer for the benefit of all the people of Scotland, where Nicola Sturgeon obviously was quite confrontational and went as far as to simply disparage him as Tory light?
Which your Westminster leader, Stephen Flynn, is doing. He's describing Keir Starmer as David Cameron in a red tie. Not sure that elevates the debate particularly. Kate?
So 2 points. First of all, I have made a pitch in this campaign to no voters. In other words, people that don't vote for us, saying that we do need to bring back more respectful dialogue and actually understand the reasons why people are not yet persuaded about independence. The second thing is that my priorities are to serve the people of Scotland. So when it comes to, for example, eradicating poverty, I will work with anybody if it furthers the case of eradicating poverty. Thirdly, though, the SNP continues to be elected on the basis of wanting to achieve independence for Scotland. It's in our manifesto. We're not apologetic about wanting to deliver independence, and voters obviously vote accordingly, and that will be one of our main aims when it comes to making the case for independence and ultimately securing independence, because I believe that is a means to an end, not least an end to poverty.
Would you ever consider going into a former coalition with Keir Starmer?
I think it unlikely. But
it's not an outright no.
Well, all of us have been asked this question, and for me, I'd want to see the devolution, for example, of constitutional affairs, if there was to ever be any discussion of working with other parties in an informal way.
Ash?
Yes, I mean, I think that we have potentially, after 20 years, outgrown devolution in terms of our ambition for Scotland. And, I look at some of the things that I would like to achieve for Scotland, and I think many of us would want this. And I think it's very difficult to deliver those things under the straitjacket of being part of the UK. So I'm unashamedly pro-independence. I think that's the way we're going to
What about the straitjacket of the European Union?
I think it's the way that we'll get to a better country. But I have set out very strongly in my candidacy that I see it as important that we reset for the SNP. I think there has been a perception out there that perhaps we're not focusing on the priorities that the people have. So I've said that as First Minister, I will see it as my duty to focus very strongly on delivering for the people of Scotland on the things that are priorities to them. So that's the NHS, the cost of living crisis and so on. And whilst I would consider the independence case as important, I think that should be outside of the Parliament in a separate body as part of the wider movement. And that way the First Minister is just focusing on delivering for the people of Scotland.
Humza?
I suppose I would say to people, and to Donald in particular, just look at my track record. So I've spent 10.5 years in government working right across parties. So I've dealt with and engaged alongside Anna Sawar, for example, in the fight against racism and Islamophobia. I think the party and the government has been at its strongest when it's worked across the political divide. An example of that would be working with Monica Lennon, a Labour member of the Scottish Parliament, and when we brought forward our bill in relation to period poverty and making sure that period products are more freely available. And of course we're in a cooperation agreement with the Greens, who, although they support us in independence, of course there are differences between the two parties. So we've got a good track record of working across the political divide, and I think it's important the next First Minister, certainly I would, work across the political divide. And when it comes to Keir Starmer, I work with anybody to see the back of the Tories, any progressive party to see the back of the Tories. My worry about Keir Starmer is that he is in danger of selling Labour's soul to get into Downing Street. And you just have to look at the latest exchange at PMQs around the illegal migration bill, and how, frankly, the Labour Party are trying to scrape the bottom of the barrel for some votes. And I just would appeal to Scottish Labour, at least, to make sure they don't lose that progressive agenda that I think on many issues we actually share.
Ash, it's your turn to come under the spotlight in case you thought I'd forgotten you. You were hoping I might have done. Kate?
Great. Ash, you've talked a lot about change to governance in the SNP. Can you be quite specific? What new structures would you put in place and why?
Yeah, so I'm not entirely sure that we need new structures. I think what we need to do is go back to the structures that we previously had in the SNP, where democracy was stronger, where party members were able to feed in motions for debate at conference, where, we were legendary for having these absolute rammy type discussions about policy at conference, and that those policies then fed into government. I think possibly over the last few years we've moved away from that, and I wonder if that's, we've obviously been talking about the reason why we think we might have lost members, perhaps because we don't know for sure, but perhaps that's one of the reasons that we've lost members, is that they don't feel as involved in the process of making policy or deciding on where we should go as a government as they used to.
So how would you boost membership?
Well, I think having fresh leadership would be a good start. I think that if we focus on the things that are important to the membership, and I would see that one of the main things that I think is important to the membership is that drive towards independence. So I think, as I'm the only candidate that set out a plan to get to independence and to cross those hurdles, that I would assume that would be very exciting to many of the SNP members out there who are looking for a strong leader that wants to stand up to and can take on Westminster and not back down.
Two sides of the same coin is trust within the SNP and trust of the SNP. What would you change on day one when it comes to inspiring that trust across the nation?
So I think we need to focus very heavily on the priorities of the people of Scotland. I saw a poll, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, where they asked the public what they thought the SNP government's priorities were, and then they asked the public what their priorities were, and the two columns, they didn't match up. So there's very much a perception out there that we have become focused on some of our own internal niche issues, and that we're a little bit in part of a bubble, and we're not listening to and responding appropriately to the public and the public's concerns.
Humza.
So you have backed EFTA over EU membership,
No,
which is not, of course, backed by our membership. You've said that you would unpick the Green Deal, which was backed by 95% of the membership, and you've said that we are going too fast when it comes to our just transition to net zero. That just transition, of course, backed by the party membership. How can a party membership really trust you to listen to them?
Because anything and everything that I would put forward as part of my platform, I would look to debate with the members at conference. And I think you're misrepresenting my position on a couple of those issues there. And what I said about EFTA is that as it will take us quite a long time to possibly rejoin the EU, which I know is party policy, and that as part of that at least would be having our own currency. We know that we won't be able to rejoin the EU without having our own currency, and that both my fellow candidates here have not set out any kind of short-term plan to get to currency, and indeed maybe many years away under either Humza or Kate, that we potentially would not be able to rejoin the EU for some time. So what I'm setting out is a very pragmatic approach whereby, and I don't see these as an either-or situation, and these could be complementary, and certainly in the very short term, becoming a member of EFTA can take only a matter of weeks. And
which country joined EFTA in a matter of weeks?
Well, it's certainly an option for
just
Scotland.
Which country of the countries that are in EFTA? Which one joined
the
in a matter of weeks?
The joining process, if you look up the joining process for EFTA, I think it can be something like 6 to 8 weeks.
Sure,
so
but which of the countries that are currently members of EFTA joined in a few weeks?
If we get to the point where we've become independent and then we try to negotiate with the UK government in a position of weakness, as I see it, where we're not in the EU, we're looking to leave the internal market of the UK, we're in a very, very weak negotiating position. So this is entirely a pragmatic approach based on strengthening our hand and giving us access to a kind of a single market and some free movement of people, which is obviously something that Scotland is missing at the moment.
Let's have a text question from Mark in Aberdeen, who says, I'm a unionist. Like, according to many polls, a majority in Scotland. Would you accept that you've done absolutely nothing to reach out to us since the 2014 referendum, other than the odd Twitter jibe and assuming we're all Tories? Kate?
Well, that is precisely why I think that we should be reaching out to no voters. There is no path to independence without persuading no voters. And there's no persuasion there unless you have a respectful dialogue with no voters. I think we have made progress in terms of the debates and discussions around the economy, but quite clearly things have changed profoundly since 2014. And my response to Mark was that those who, like Mark, haven't been persuaded yet need to be persuaded, and to do that in a respectful fashion. I think, secondly, we do need to make a stronger economic pitch for independence. And that's not just about abstract political arguments. It's also about demonstrating how Scotland, within, for example, 10 years, could be wealthier and fairer, as other comparator countries are, through independence.
Ash?
Yes, I mean, I know, I have friends, that are unionists. I'm well aware of the fact that not all unionists are Tories, but in fact, I do have some Tory voters who are pro-independence. So I think it goes across all party lines, and I don't think you can stereotype people at all. I think
and 30% of SNP voters voted to leave the EU.
Absolutely.
So you can't assume that everybody thinks the same way.
Absolutely. So there's a huge variety of positions that people might take on these issues. But I do accept that, we need to set out the case for independence. We need to set that out clearly. We need to make the case. I believe that we need to do better on answering some of the questions that we didn't quite get the case right for in 2014. And the way I see it, if we can show the public that they'll be better off in an independent Scotland, that the country will be better, it'll be fairer, and it will be greener, then I think that many people will see that. They will see the progress that if I'm leader, I'll be developing towards creating the infrastructure to becoming an independent country. And they will have that confidence that should we become independent, we'll be successful. And I believe that will go some way to convincing many people.
Humza?
So I don't necessarily agree with the premise of the question. I think we have governed in the interests of all of Scotland. So whether it's the Scottish Child Payment, whether it's the Social Security, Scotland that we have created, and of course has dignity and fairness and compassion, respect at its heart, whether it's a small business bonus scheme, for example, whether it's our leadership through, and Nicola's leadership in particular, through the COVID pandemic, we've demonstrated that it's not just the constitutional issue, as important as that is, that we govern in the interests of all of Scotland. But I actually agree a lot with what Kate says. I think the way to persuade no voters is to make sure that we understand why they want to vote no and respect them, and respect, for example, that many of them will have an attachment to the British identity, and that does not mean that you can't vote for independence. We've got to respect that, we've got to understand that, and we've got to persuade by governing well, but also by inspiring people. We can't just rely on pointing out Westminster's failings, as many as they are. We have to inspire people with a vision of what we can do with independence.
Right, let's go. Dare we take a caller from south of the border? I think we can have one, can't we? Robbie's in Chelmsford. Hello, Robbie.
Good evening. Given the current geopolitical situation and instability, would any of the candidates be bold enough to consider, in the spirit of change, a change to the policy of the SNP on scrapping Trident?
You can answer with one word if you wish.
No.
Well, they're all agreed on that one. So, but you understand the premise behind the question. Given the current situation, it does seem a little bit incongruous, doesn't it? I mean, are you all committed to Scotland being a member of NATO?
Yes.
Yes.
That's policy,
are you all committed to the 2% GDP funding?
Yes.
Committed,
yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's a very uncontroversial question, Robbie. Thank you for that. Let's come back north of the border. Let's go to John in Glasgow. Hello, John.
Hi, Iain. Long time no speak. Hope you're well.
Hi, very well. What would you like to say?
Just my question is, in the event of a foreign policy dispute which could lead to war, would the candidates side with the EU or the UK perspective? In other words, there could be a difference. The UK might want to go to war and the EU might not, and we're currently not in the EU.
Kate?
I mean, let me give you a principled answer in a moment, but in terms of the substance of the answer, one of the challenges of devolution is that we don't get any say over foreign policy, and it's a particular frustration when it comes to us wanting to do things differently to the rest of the UK. In terms of the principled approach, I think we would want to see the UK and the EU stand shoulder to shoulder when it comes to significant foreign policy issues. That is what they have done in the past successfully, and that's what we would want to see again. That would be my principled preference, but as somebody who wants to have close relationships with the UK and the EU as an independent country, we'd want to work collaboratively with them both.
Humza.
First and foremost, we would do what's in the best interest of Scotland and the people of Scotland. It's one of the reasons I joined the SNP, was a principled stance we took against the illegal invasion of Iraq. Yet our sons and daughters had to go and fight in that illegal invasion when a vast majority of Scotland, certainly by many polls, suggested we disagreed with that war. So we take the best interest of Scotland when it came to any foreign policy decisions. But we would be the closest of allies with the United Kingdom and, of course, our European neighbours as well. So I don't see there being an issue where we'd be in conflict and having to choose between one or the other. If there was that conflict that existed, I'd hope Scotland would play the role of the international broker, bring the EU, bring the UK together, and potentially see if we can forge a way forward.
Ash, very quickly.
Yes, I'd agree with what both of my colleagues have said there. I think a strong driver for many people for Scottish independence is that ability to perhaps make different choices on foreign policy. And obviously, for many of us, war would be an absolute last resort type situation. In a situation where it was the UK versus the EU, you'd have to make that that call on the basis of the evidence in front of you.
Right, quick fire question now, which I know you all love. Well, let's start off with this one. If Donald Trump becomes president again and visits Trump Turnberry, will you go for a round of golf with him? And if you don't play golf, meet him for a cup of tea? Ash?
No.
I would need a lot of persuading, so no.
Yeah, unlikely.
3 words to describe Alex Salmond, and feel free to use more than 4 letters in each of them.
Former First Minister?
Yeah. Oh, very good. Very. Can either of you beat that answer? You're ahead there, Kate, I think.
I don't think so. I'll let Ash go next.
Bear in mind...
A talented politician. Is that 3 words?
A talented politician. Yeah, you can get away with that. Humza, the pressure is on you now.
Given his interventions, particularly against me in this campaign, the 3 words I would choose are bite my tongue.
Oh, that's so disappointing. I was expecting a headline from that one. Now, I spell my Christian name the Scottish way. My middle name is Campbell. I know I've lost a lot of people with that. I support Dunfermline Athletic in Scotland, and I'm a descendant of Robbie Burns. What's the most Scottish thing about the 3 of you? Ash?
Well, this is interesting. So I have taken, you can take the genetic testing, because I have a Scots branch of a family and an Irish branch, and I was very interested to find out what percentage I was of each.
Remember, it's quickfire.
Oh, yeah. I've lost it already. So I was just going to say that somebody in Australia got in touch with me and said that they could take the family tree back to the 12th century, and it was a very famous independence person who was quite significant in the independence of the time, so I thought that was quite interesting.
Okay, Humza.
So I would say it's my love of Iron Brew. My wife would tell you it's because I'm ever so slightly frugal with our money.
I can sing pretty much every Runrig song there is.
Well, that's worth
the lyrics to every Runrig song.
Your radio.
Do you want to prove
Don't
it?
try me, no.
Because you know it'll go viral if you do.
Absolutely, and not for the good reasons or the right reasons.
Say something nice about the English, Humza.
They are our cousins, our friends, our neighbours, and I love them.
Kate?
They're my best friends, having studied and worked there for many years.
Sounds like some of my best friends are English, doesn't it? Ash?
My children are half English.
Is that's the nicest thing you can think of to say about the English?
They're obviously our good neighbours.
Here's a serious one. Your Westminster colleague, Joanna Cherry, has gone through 3 years of hell with rape and death threats and has had no support from the SNP leadership. This is really for Kate and Yousaf. Do you think you owe her an apology?
I think anybody who feels like they haven't had sufficient support needs to have more support. I think many of us have faced similar death threats and so on, but Joanna Cherry's had it at the next level. So from my perspective, we need to do more in terms of supporting our members.
Humza?
Yeah, our party, to be honest, can do more when it comes to supporting its members. I don't.
Do you feel you should have done more?
No, I don't think I should have done more. I'm not responsible for these disgusting, nefarious individuals who send her death threats, in the same way that Joanna Cherry, of course, is not responsible for the people who not just send death threats to me, but have just been charged for threatening and abusive behaviour towards my family and I. So, Joanna Cherry is not responsible for them. I'm not responsible for these nefarious, disgusting individuals. But the party should do more to provide support for all of our members. I think particularly women and female members and people of colour who often get the brunt of it.
So, some of the abuse that Joanna has had, and others of us have had it as well, has come from...
You should say she's one of your supporters.
It has come from within the party. So under me as leader, that would stop. I think it's not acceptable to be attacking other elected members, whether you disagree with them or not. We all need to be able to work together and respect each other.
And the final fun question, because we always like to have a fun one at the end. Who gets you on the dance floor? Ash?
Well, I'm usually the last person to be dragged off any dance floor ever, so it doesn't take much to get me dancing.
Go on. Who?
Oh, what songs?
Yeah.
I like Superstition. That's a great one.
Okay. Humza?
Queen.
Anything.
Any Queen track.
And apart from Run Rig, Kate?
Go for ABBA.
obviously.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. Anyway, look, thank you very much indeed to all three of you. It's been a great debate, and if you've missed any of it, you can catch up on Global Player over the course of the next few days. Enjoy the rest of the contest. There's only a week to go. This time next week, we will know which one of you has won. I hope you'll be a regular guest on LBC, particularly my show, if I may say so, when we know the result. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And we'll get to your reaction to what you've heard over the last hour in just a few minutes' time. We'll get reaction also from the Scottish Conservatives, Scottish Labour, the Scottish Lib Dems, and the former SNP leader and First Minister Alex Salmond, who's now the leader of the pro-independence Alba Party. I did think about encouraging him to ask a question, but that might not have gone down too well, I suspect. Alex from Peterhead, exactly. You are listening to LBC. Let's get the news headlines. It's 8:04.